Hello everyone, and you're watching Bitcoin Bubble news channel. There have been efforts to control the internet, especially in the US, for many years. It was known as the driver's license for the internet when Obama was in office. The plan is that you should need a government issued ID to connect to the internet. They know not only what you say and post online, but also what you read online. But once it's directly linked to a government issued ID, they could charge you with things like spreading false information and that kind of thing. There have also been calls from people like former Google CEO Eric Schmidt to punish people who spread what they say is false information. This is why IDs need to be linked to people's social media accounts and internet access so that arrests and other law enforcement activities can be easier. We learn about the rise of central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, how blockchain and decentralization could change global financial systems, and the new ways that digital currencies are being controlled in this recent big picture with James Patrick and Whitney Webb. Bitcoin is trading at about $66,000 right now. It has gone up 1% in the last 24 hours and 4% in the last week for this talk. Don't forget to like, follow, and share this channel before we start talking. Let's hear more from Whitney Webb now, of that sort. We also need digital ID because we need to know who is online and using these tools. I believe it is very clear that a crisis or event of some kind will be needed to get people to use a CBDC or this kind of digital currency scheme. I believe that the need for digital IDs will be pushed during times of immigration or refugee stress. It seems like a very simple reason for them to give. A quick way for them to get people to agree. Since we don't know who these people are, they could be crooks, they could be anyone, and it will be sold as a way to make people feel safer during the migrant crisis. So I think people have been becoming more aware for a while now that most US government policies like endless war are supported by both parties. This is sometimes called the uniparty, but people forget that too. So this is what a lot of people call the two-party model or the left-right system. I don't think many people really understand how that model works though. What if you think of it as the establishment's left and right hands? One of those hands will purposely cause a problem. When the other side steps in, they offer a solution, but that solution was always what the establishment wanted. But it's sold as a way to fix a problem that the other side made. It gives the impression that the opposing force fixed a problem when, in fact, one hand of the system made the problem and then the other hand offered a solution. The person who says he made CBDCs is called Oliver Gale and is from Barbados. He made one of the first CBDC projects in the Caribbean, if not the first one, went on to play a key role in making the ANIRA, the Nigerian CBDC. In Nigeria, the CBDC is only accessible to people who have a national identification number, which is part of the Nigerian Digital ID project. In other words, you need a digital ID to get into the Nigerian CBDC. And to get people to use the CBDC scheme, they cut off most of Nigeria's cash and circulation. So even though these conditions were set up to force people to use CBDC, the people are still refusing. And that means that most people don't seem to believe that CBDCs can help people get access to money, right? In Nigeria, these people who supposedly have an identity gap and are financially excluded don't want the financial inclusion that the CBDC is offering them. They don't see how it will help them. They think of it as something the government uses. The government has used these kinds of systems to go after media and other people, breaking human rights and other rules. This has happened in the state in Nigeria and in other African countries where these kinds of systems are being adopted. That means it's not a way to improve human rights. It's not a way to make everyone feel more welcome. It automatically leaves people out. We just heard Whitney Webb talk about the push around the world for CBDCs and how they might affect people's privacy and ability to make their own money. Now let's hear them talk more about what blockchain is and how it can be used to make a different kind of decentralized banking system. Whitney also talks about the reasons behind centralizing power over digital currencies and how that affects people's ability to handle their own money. Let's hear what Whitney Webb has to say now. I believe they would want private banks to play a big part in the future digital currency system for a number of reasons. If a private company manages your money and banks you, it's much easier for them to bank you than the federal government. One example is that if the Federal Reserve did a direct issue CBDC, it would be harder for them to freeze someone's bank account or debank them in a big way than if it were a private company. For example, JP Morgan Chase was one of the first banks to debank Dr. Mercola and some of his leaders without giving a reason. They just told me that they can't help me with my finances anymore. There were no questions. If the CBDC was given directly, that would be very hard to do. This is like the case that has been made for social media companies to control. They say that it's because they are private businesses. In any way they choose, they can limit speech, but we now know that their limits on private speech were caused by pressure from the public sector, right? Again, people need to remember that this is a partnership between the government and the business sector. That's the type that most people in the US use. The US digital dollar will also be a mix of public and private money. In the United States, the Fed, the central bank, will work with the private banks that own the Fed, in which they will work together to make the system work. It won't be open to everyone. The whole thing won't be kept secret. We work together. While the Fed could release CBDC directly, it would take them a few years to plan, test, and use it. These dollar peg fixed coins are already here. If you want to use them, they're on blockchains already. And if you choose to use those, a lot of the steps that the Fed would normally take a few years have already been taken. You can have a similar system without having to make a straight issued CBDC if you make them follow certain rules, like keeping their reserves at the Fed. One country that already has CBDC is China. This means that the US is behind. They say that we should use the digital dollars that are already out there to stay competitive and get ahead of the game. There you have it, dollar peg pin coins. There is a very small chance that the banks that are part of this new system will be the ones we already have in the US. That's because there seems to be a big wave of bank consolidation every time there's a major financial crisis, like in 2008 and more recently with the Silicon Valley banking crisis. There was also Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, who told Congress during the Silicon Valley bank disaster that they were only going to save the banks. It's called systemically important banks, and Yellen can pretty much decide which banks are worth saving and which ones aren't. And this kind of keeps up the too big to fail plan that we heard about in 2008. If you look at the people building the infrastructure and the digital currencies they back, you can tell that this system is being rolled out in this way. One of the biggest developers right now, if CBDC works with this business. Click here to see the whole interview. Click on the link in the summary. Watch part 2 of this movie to see what else Whitney Webb has to say about how money will be handled in the future. We'd love to know what you think about these questions. Could digital IDs and CBDCs work together to make a way to keep track of money? What do you think stablecoins will do to change decentralized finance? Glad you tuned into Only the Savvy. Please subscribe, like, share, and join if you like this conversation. Please share our video if you want to see more interesting material about how decentralized finance and technologies are changing.